Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to Playing Above the Line's very first mini-series. I'm Alan, your host, and this episode is one of 10 we're recording with T.R. Miller's legendary football coach, Jamie Riggs. Thank you to Milligan's Hurry Clean for sponsoring this week's episode. Milligan's Hurry Clean is an emergency service provider for large-scale disasters. The Hurry Clean team is proud to support T.R. Miller athletic programs. Go Tigers!
Okay, well, this one I wrote after I retired about an incident that happened back in the 90s, and it's called The Legend of the Homecoming Curfew.
I will say that my son Garrett, so if he doesn't tell the story, you got to ask him about the homecoming incident. And so I'm glad you brought this one up because this one's a legend.
And it's absolutely 110% true. There's no embellishment here. Yeah. This is absolutely true. Homecoming was one of those necessary evils for football coaches. So it was just.
Well, this is going to be good.
I wrote this in 2016. Okay. Since it's homecoming at T.R. Miller as well as the 20th anniversary of this legend, I want to make sure that all the facts are correct, that everyone understands why it was so necessary. So this is called The Legend of the Homecoming Curfew. Now, let me start out by saying that all good high school football coaches hate homecoming. There are a few necessary evils in our profession: overtime games, quarterbacks who fight with their girlfriend before the big game, etc. Homecoming falls into that category. It is still the biggest social event of the year, and players have their mind on everything except the homecoming football game. As the coach, it was my job to make sure that they considered the possibility that we could actually lose the game, which would certainly dampen the homecoming spirit. It was my duty to protect them from themselves, and a simple verbal warning, which I sent their way daily, was not going to get the job done. We were in the midst of the greatest 3-year run in the history of T.R. Miller football, and I had a senior class that had confidence that bordered on cocky. To say that these guys were strong-willed would be an understatement. They needed a strong hand, and I felt like I needed one more piece to finish the building of this great team as we approached the end of October. To be honest, there are times when everyone associated with a football team just needs to be reminded who is in charge. And on Thursday, October 24th, 1996, that would have been me. Now, during my 27 years as head coach of the T.R. Miller Tigers, we always had a curfew the night before the game. It was always 9 p.m. I would put it on the itinerary and remind them as they left on Thursday afternoon. Now, the purpose of this curfew is not to catch people, but to serve as a guide to remind them to get some extra rest. I really never went out checking on players, and in fact, I was usually at home working on game plans the night before. Homecoming was different. In those days, they were finishing up floats on Thursday nights, and everyone was out and about. There was a lot of riding around and usually some rolling of yards and egg tossing. It is the fear of almost every coach that some of their best players will end up being picked up by the police during homecoming for doing something stupid. I got to the point that I quit saying, "Don't do something stupid now," because they would go out of their way to show me that they could. My standard line was, "Don't do something that will cause you to miss your homecoming game." I knew that the Miller football team of 1996 had every intention of extending their homecoming activities as late as possible on Thursday night before our game with Hillcrest the following evening. The Jaguars had a record of 1-6, but had lost several close games to some good teams. We were undefeated and had absolutely no concept that we could possibly lose to Hillcrest. The battle lines between the head coach and the team had been drawn. There would be a curfew check. That Thursday afternoon, I gave each of our coaches a list of 10 or 12 players that they would need to check on that night, complete with phone numbers. We were just arriving in the cell phone era, and everyone still had phone lines in their homes. After giving my Thursday afternoon warning, I called out each coach's list and had him meet with his call group. Each coach told the players that they would call sometime after 9 p.m. and threaten them appropriately. I could see the players laughing and scheming as they left the field. They felt I was no match for them when it came to curfew. My coaching staff was in a bad spot, and they knew it. They were in the middle of no man's land with both sides packing ammunition for the battle. I would like to say that in a situation like this, an experienced and knowledgeable assistant coach is the best thing you can have. I knew that they would wait until several minutes after 9 before checking on the players. They would also call the sophomores on the team first, giving the seniors a few extra minutes to get there. They might even give a guy the benefit of the doubt when their parents lied about them being in the shower or across the street helping grandma fix something at her house. They would never offer the list to me the next day unless I asked for it. And when I did, they might say, "I talked to everybody, Coach." This way they could technically not lie to me. They would do everything they could to keep from turning the player in for not making curfew. That evening, about 9:15 p.m., I got in my truck and I rode to where the seniors were building their float. It just happened to be across the street from Michael Bell's house. Michael was our 300-pound plus offensive tackle, and I knew he had been helping to work on the float during the week. I figured he went home, took his phone call, and went back to the float. I parked my truck down the street and just walked up to the float building. There was Michael, and the look on his face when he saw me said, "I have messed up." I just said, "Running a little late, are you, Michael?" He said, "Yes, sir," and he headed across the street to his house. He wasn't the only one. All total, I ended up the next day with about 7 or 8 who did not make curfew. It was the talk of T.R. Miller High School the next day, who was on the list and who thought they slid by. Suddenly, the homecoming festivities had a little less importance, and the outcome of the curfew check was top news. Best of all, I had never discussed with the players or any of my coaches what would happen to the offending parties. None of my coaches asked when they dropped off their list, but I appeared to be in a good mood, so they kind of joked about it. The players weren't laughing at all. In those days, we had an 11 o'clock homecoming pep rally, and all the players would leave after the pep rally, go get them something to eat, and report back to about 1 p.m. We would have some meetings and load them up on buses and take them downtown to the 2 o'clock homecoming parade. After the parade, we would hang out down at the city park for a few minutes before walking over to Old Willie's restaurant to eat our pregame meal at 3 o'clock. As they filed into the gym for the pep rally, I spoke to each of them with a big smile on my face. It gave hope to a few of the victims, but some of the older ones had fallen for this before and did not smile back. I did notice that everyone seemed to arrive at the stadium well before the 1 o'clock deadline. Not one person, player or coach, mentioned curfew. They still held out hope that I had forgotten about it. I was 41 years old at the time, and the attack on my short-term memory had not started yet. They were out of luck. As I walked in the old dressing room under the stadium, the room fell silent immediately.
We're taking a quick break to thank our sponsor, Milligan's Hurry Clean. An emergency service provider for large-scale disasters, the Hurry Clean team is proud to support the T.R. Miller Tigers. Now, back to the show.
I went through the itinerary for the afternoon leading up to the game. I then announced that we had some team members who did not make curfew last night, and I read out the list. I informed them of the importance of doing what I had asked them to do, and announced that they would be running a mile of stadium bleachers. Now, this meant that they would be running 4 laps around the track, including up and down the steps of the stadium bleachers on each lap. The player could not stop and walk, they had to run. Having to do this after a day of practice was something that no one wanted to do, especially this senior group. They hated running as much as any class I've ever coached. They assumed we would be running these on Monday. I always thought that it was important that your team viewed you as consistent, yet unpredictable. It kind of helped to keep everyone on his toes, so to speak. I added one more thing. If you plan on playing in the game tonight, you'll need to run these bleachers while everyone else goes to the homecoming parade. I really didn't care about how everyone would react to the news. They had challenged me to this homecoming duel, and I was firing this cannon. Behind me, I could feel the expressions of my coaches, which ran from disbelief to small smiles. There were a couple of them standing behind me, bobbing their heads up and down like, "Yes, you will do this, you will do this." And they were saying this because of the Allen Howard rule. The Allen Howard rule says, always do what you need to do now so you can have what you want later. Alan Howard was a defensive tackle that had played for us, graduating in 1995. Alan often ran stadium bleachers for small errors in judgment. One night after practice, he didn't want to run his bleachers, and I got tired of encouraging him. I told him if he preferred, he could just sit out the first half of the game that week instead of running his bleachers. Alan said he thought he would do just that. So he sat out the first half of the game, and he asked me at halftime if I wanted him to start the second half. I told him I would call him when I needed him. When the game ended, he was still standing on the sideline. Apparently, I had not needed him. If any of the losers of the Curfew lottery had chosen not to run that day, they not only would have sat out this game, but the next one as well. When I left the locker room, some of my coaches stayed to encourage them to do the right thing. If you're going to challenge someone to a duel, you might want to consider what kind of ammunition might be in their arsenal. The bus left to go to the parade, and the runners stayed. I was out there watching them and counting their laps. One of our guys slipped going up the bleachers, skinned his shins, shouted some expletives that I pretended not to hear. They finished, and we went back to dress to get ready to go to town to eat the pregame meal. I announced that the bus would be leaving in 10 minutes. They were all on the bus when I got there. Surely food would make them feel better. When the game began, we seemed to be a little sluggish. I announced on the sideline that we need to pick up the pace some. One of my coaches looked at me and says, "I tell you what the problem is, Coach. They're tired. They've been running all afternoon." I just smiled. We went on to win the game 41-14, and in my mind, I declared myself the official winner of Homecoming 1996. The dictionary tells us that a legend is an important story that is regarded as historical but unauthenticated. It often teaches an important lesson. Many years later, I would give my homecoming warning. I would say, it would be a mistake to ignore this. If you don't believe me, check out my homecoming history. We would leave the field, and I could see the older players telling the younger ones the legend of the homecoming curfew. The seniors on the 1996 team won 41 games in their 3 years at T.R. Miller, a school record. Included in that was a homecoming victory their senior year, one they will never forget.
Oh, that was a good one. Coach, a couple of things struck me about that story. Number one was what a legend. I mean, you heard about that story years and years after it happened. But homecoming at T.R. Miller, I don't have a frame of reference because I went to T.R. Miller, never went anywhere else. Maybe you can help me, but homecoming at T.R. Miller was always kind of a different animal. I mean, it was or still is a huge deal. And even in college, when you would tell people kind of what you did during homecoming week and whatnot, people just looked at you like you had two heads because there were no floats, there was no, big parade, there was definitely not, no dance. I mean, it was just something that kind of was an anomaly at Miller. So what about homecoming is so special, you think?
Because we still have made this a community deal. Everybody looks forward to homecoming. Mm-hmm. Maybe the only thing you're going to do for homecoming is come to the game and maybe catch a glimpse of the parade downtown, but you'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
We have more people at T.R. Miller come back for homecoming than any place I have ever seen. I've coached several different places. Unbelievable the amount of people that come back. Now, from a coaching standpoint, homecoming drove me nuts. But I love to see the people come back. A lot of them come by and see me, during the day and all that kind of stuff. And just the excitement surrounding the whole thing. And even the weeks before, Zeke would tell me, so-and-so's coming back for homecoming. We knew people that were coming back. A lot of the former players are coming by, and it was just an exciting time in our community. And I think that's what and we have built on that year after year after year.
Well, it says a lot, and it goes a lot to the tradition of Miller, but it also goes to the fact that, like you said, in my case anyway, and I know I speak for a lot of other people, we look forward to coming back and reconnecting with the Coach Riggs and the Johnny Folsoms and the Beth Baines and the Barbara Pages and the Lane Kings, those teachers that had an impact on us when we were in high school and really cared about not only our education, but cared about us as people and really were genuinely authentically interested in what we were doing. And so coming back and being able to reconnect with those folks was always a special time.
It was great. And this was always kind of special for me a little bit. A lot of folks came back, they come back, they've been very successful, they've gone on things. We had a lot of folks who, when they went through high school, they weren't a top-notch student. They were some of the folks that would have been eligible for 3 licks in 3 days or whatever. Yeah. But a lot of them have gone on to have families, good jobs, and they wanted the people who had helped them through school know that. And the first one a lot of them would always go see is Donnie Raj.
Yeah.
Because Donnie dealt with a lot of their discipline stuff and a lot of stuff. It was amazing the folks, the first thing they wanted to do is go see Coach Raj. And they wanted him to know, I got a job, I'm working here, I've got 2 children, and that took me a while to get together, but I got it together.
Yeah.
And to thank him for being the one that was on their tail all the time. So homecoming is still, I think, special, and we hope it'll always be that way and be a time that people just look on very fondly.
Yeah, never underestimate the importance of home. Thank you to Milligan's Hurry Clean for sponsoring this week's episode. Milligan's Hurry Clean is an emergency service provider for large-scale disasters. The Hurry Clean team is proud to support TR Miller athletic programs. Go Tigers! We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avisogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.